Kid's story reads like a movie of betrayal, bullets, and a rebirth that forged one of 50 Cent's most loyal soldiers. Today, we're unpacking how a Ninth Ward poverty poet became G-Unit's relentless grinder, and why his scars are the blueprint. Next, let's roll it back to where the hunger began. He wasn't born into comfort. He was born into a fight. Every line he wrote sounded like a siren in New Orleans' night air. Real pain, real consequences, real survival. And that's exactly why his rise felt inevitable. Now, watch how that survival turned into momentum. Before the cosigns and headlines, there was just a kid who refused to fold. From Nut the Kid to Kid Kid, this is the journey that proves resilience isn't a vibe, it's a lifestyle. Let's start at the beginning. Before the bright lights, before the studio plaques, there was New Orleans' Ninth Ward, a place where hope had to fight for air. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood that nurtured dreams, it was the kind that tested them. Kid Kid, then known as Nut the Kid, learned early that survival came before success. The Ninth Ward was its own universe. Cracked streets, boarded up homes, and neighbors who carried both trauma and pride like armor. Every corner had a rhythm, and every story was carved out of struggle. For Kid, music became less about fame and more about breathing. It was the only language that translated pain into purpose. But where most people saw struggle, he saw a story worth telling, and that story was just getting started. He called himself a poverty poet, and that name fit like a scar. Every verse he wrote came straight from the grind lines about dodging trouble, burying friends, and still finding a reason to laugh. His words weren't polished for radio, they were carved out of reality. You could hear the exhaustion in his delivery, the hunger in his tone. For him, rap wasn't a career plan, it was therapy. When most kids his age were thinking about school dances or sneakers, Kid Kid was writing his own autobiography in rhyme, line by line, block by block. His goal wasn't to sound good, it was to sound true. That truth hit harder than any beat, and it was the first thing that made people in the neighborhood start to take notice. Growing up in the Ninth Ward meant loyalty was currency. Betrayal could cost you everything. And even though the world hadn't heard his name yet, Kid was already earning respect where it mattered most in the streets. He wasn't chasing clout or followers, he was chasing survival. His early performances weren't on stages, they were on corners, surrounded by people who could spot a fake from a mile away. And every time he grabbed the mic, they believed him. Because his story wasn't borrowed, it was lived. The streets had confirmed what he already knew. Deep down, he was meant for something bigger than the block. Every day in that neighborhood was a test. Would you fold or would you fight? Kid Kid fought. He learned to balance pain with rhythm, fear with ambition. The Ninth Ward taught him resilience before the industry ever tested him. And that grit would become the foundation of everything that followed. Because the next move, the one that would change everything, was about to come knocking in the most unexpected way. It all started with a neighborhood connection, not an A&R rep, not a record deal, just a word-of-mouth introduction that would change Kid Kid's entire life. A local OG who knew both Wayne's circle and Kid's raw talent made the connection. There were no fancy meetings or demo tapes, just Wayne pulling up in front of Kid's house in New Orleans, asking if he was ready. And Kid didn't hesitate. He stepped out that door with nothing but confidence and lyrics. The rest, as they say, wrote itself. What began as a neighborhood favor was about to become the moment that flipped the switch on Kid's destiny. The first time Lil Wayne heard Kid rap, it wasn't in the studio. It was right there in the open air, just raw, unfiltered bars echoing through the block. Kid didn't even make it through his fourth bar before Wayne started jumping up, hyped, yelling that he'd found something special. In that instant, Wayne wasn't looking at a kid from the Ninth Ward. He was looking at an artist who could go toe-to-toe with anyone in the game. It was a spark, pure and electric, that neither of them could ignore. That single freestyle lit the fuse, and what followed next was a movement that would redefine Southern rap forever. From that moment, Kid wasn't just another local name, he was part of something brewing under the surface, the Squad Up era. Lil Wayne was assembling a team of hungry young MCs, and Kid was one of the first pieces of that puzzle. Alongside names like Gouda Gouda, T Streets, and others, they started recording non-stop, dropping gritty mixtapes that captured the sound of the streets. Between 2002 and 2003, the SQ series became a legend, blending Wayne's lyricism with the crew's raw, fearless energy. And right there in the mix was Kid Young, relentless and ready for anything. But as the mixtape spread and Wayne's fame exploded, that same energy that lifted Kid up would soon begin to test his loyalty. Kid wasn't chasing stardom, he was chasing validation, respect, and a way to pull his family out of struggle. Working with Wayne was validation that the pain in his lyrics meant something. He was in rooms he'd only dreamed of, standing shoulder to shoulder with people who were shaping the future of hip-hop. Every verse he laid down was proof that someone from his block could make it out. Still, deep down, he knew fame comes with a cost, and the bill was coming due. Because even when the spotlight shines, shadows always form, and for Kid, those shadows were already starting to move. When the SQ, Squad Up mixtape era began, it wasn't just about music, it was about identity. Between 2002 and 2003, the crew dropped 7 raw, unfiltered mixtapes that reshaped the sound of Southern hip-hop. Lil Wayne was the nucleus, but the energy came from the hungry voices surrounding him. Kid Kid, Gudda Gudda, T Streets, and others who lived every lyric they wrote. Their sound was street-coded, fast-paced, and fearless. It wasn't made for the radio, it was made for the people still on the corners. Kid wasn't just rapping, he was documenting life, one verse at a time, proving that pain and purpose could exist on the same beat. What started as a small local movement was quickly becoming the backbone of a new generation of hip-hop. Kid's presence in those early sessions made him more than just a guest, he was a foundation piece. He was in the room when the term "young money" was first spoken into existence, when Wayne's vision began taking shape beyond just mixtapes. For Kid, that moment felt like destiny unfolding in real time. He wasn't some random feature, he was part of the blueprint. His verses, filled with grit and authenticity, carried the weight of the Ninth Ward into every track. He represented the raw, uncut heart of New Orleans, the voice of the underdog who wouldn't stay silent. But when dreams start turning into empires, not everyone gets to keep their seat at the table. As Wayne's career skyrocketed into the Carter era, things began to shift. Studio sessions became harder to access, calls started slowing down, and invitations faded into silence. The spotlight that once seemed big enough for everyone began to shrink. Wayne was ascending into global superstardom, and naturally, the crew that helped build the foundation found themselves left in the shadows. For Kid, the sudden distance wasn't anger, it was confusion. He had been there from day one, part of the sound, part of the culture, and now the doors were closing. And when doors start closing in the industry, you've got 2 choices: knock harder or find another way in. But Kid didn't stop creating. Even when the industry turned its attention elsewhere, he stayed in the studio, still writing, still hungry. His verses became sharper, more reflective. You could hear the frustration, but you could also hear growth, a man realizing that loyalty doesn't always guarantee a return ticket. That's the cruel truth of the music business. Sometimes talent isn't enough to keep you in the room. Yet through it all, he never disrespected Wayne or the movement. He understood something deeper, that silence can sometimes say more than bitterness ever could. And that silence would soon be broken not by a diss track or a scandal, but by a song that almost changed everything for him. 2008 should have been Kid Kid's moment, his official reintroduction to the world. He'd finally gotten the look every artist dreams about, a feature on Lil Wayne's hit single, Mrs. Officer. The track was smooth, catchy, and destined for radio domination. Kid's voice was there, his flow crisp, his delivery unforgettable. But when the music video dropped, something was missing his face. His moment in the spotlight had been replaced by silence, and that silence came from a choice only someone with real integrity could make. Because behind that missing appearance was a decision that said more about Kid's character than any verse ever could. While Wayne and the crew were shooting the music video, a hurricane hit New Orleans. The city that made Kid who he was drowning again, and this time it was personal. His family was stranded. Instead of chasing fame or showing up for the cameras, he used his first ever publishing check to bring his loved ones to safety. He was in Atlanta, loading his people into cars and finding shelter while the world danced to his voice on the radio. Loyalty over limelight, that was his code. But when you choose loyalty in an industry built on ego, you learn quickly that morals don't always pay in fame. When the video aired and Kid realized he'd been cut out, there was no phone call, no explanation, no apology. Just silence. The fame train had moved on without him. But instead of lashing out or burning bridges, he accepted it with quiet understanding. It wasn't beef, he later said. It was the principle. He refused to trade integrity for attention. And that kind of mindset, standing tall when it's easier to fold, is what separated him from everyone else chasing a hit. Still, principle can't pay the bills, and the streets don't care about explanations, only results. Kid went back home to New Orleans, returning to the same blocks that raised him, now with scars of experience and a heart full of lessons. But coming home didn't mean peace. The city that once cheered for him was now testing him, watching to see if he'd changed. In the Ninth Ward, success doesn't shield you, it paints a target on your back. Envy moves quicker than opportunity, and in those tight streets, word travels fast. Everyone knew he was back, and not all of them were happy about it. And just when it seemed like he was finally settling back in, fate reminded him that in New Orleans, peace never lasts for long. Coming home was supposed to be healing, but for Kid, the Ninth Ward had other plans. Fame fades fast in the streets, but envy sticks around. The same neighborhood that once praised him now eyed him differently, not as a survivor, but as a target. He wasn't rolling with an entourage or security. He was just Curtis Stewart trying to rebuild his life. But in New Orleans, success paints a bullseye on your back. Every corner whispered his name. Every look lingered too long. He could feel the tension growing, and that tension finally exploded one night in front of the one person he never wanted to see fall for his mother. It happened outside his mom's house, the same house that had always meant safety. He had just dropped her off after attending his daughter's birthday party. It was supposed to be a peaceful night, one small break from the chaos. But peace in his world was fragile. As he sat in the car, two masked men stepped out of the shadows with a carbon 15 rifle, opening fire without a word. More than 36 shots rang out. Kid was hit 6 times in the leg, abdomen, and side as glass shattered and metal twisted around him. His mother stood frozen in the doorway, powerless to help. In that moment, life slowed down and everything became about survival. He tried to move but couldn't. The pain hadn't even registered yet, just shock. His body went numb while his mind screamed to run. He crawled toward the passenger side, pushing the door open with the last strength he had left before collapsing onto the pavement. He could see their feet through the haze of smoke and sparks. He thought they were coming to finish the job, but suddenly the gunfire stopped. Silence fell over the chaos, his blood pooled onto the street, and his thoughts turned not to revenge or fame, but to his kids. He prayed for one more chance to hear their voices, and that prayer was answered, but barely. Paramedics arrived just in time. At the hospital, doctors fought for hours to save him. They repaired shredded organs, patched torn muscle, and fitted him with a colostomy bag just to keep him alive. He wore that bag for nearly 10 months. He later said it was the darkest period of his life. Not because of pain, but because of what it took from him. His confidence, his momentum, his sense of control. But in that darkness, something else was born of hunger. A new fire. A vow that if he ever walked again, he'd come back stronger than ever. And the moment he turned his phone back on, that promise met opportunity in the form of a call from 50 Cent. Lying in that hospital bed, stitched up and barely conscious, Kid heard his phone buzz. The voice on the other end wasn't family, not a label exec. It was Curtis 50 Cent Jackson. The first thing 50 said hit like medicine. "When I got hit, my label left me. I ain't gonna do you like that." In that instant, Kid knew this wasn't a sympathy call, it was solidarity. 50 had been through the same hell, 9 bullets deep, and he recognized the look of a man who refused to die. That phone call didn't just lift his spirits, it set his future in motion. The connection wasn't random. Before the shooting, 50 had already noticed Kid from a remix he did to one of his tracks, Better Walk. At first, 50 thought someone was just biting his hook until he listened closer. What he heard wasn't imitation, it was hunger. He said it himself, "That kid killed my song." So he invited Kid to a movie set in person, handed him 5 fresh beats, and said, "Take these home and write." But the kid didn't leave. Right then and there, he started writing on the spot, laying verses before the cameras even stopped rolling. It wasn't just a writing test, it was an initiation. And Kid passed it like he'd been waiting his whole life for that moment. Then came the shooting, the moment that could have ended everything. But 50 didn't let him fade into the background. While Kid was recovering, 50 kept calling the hospital, checking in personally. When Kid was strong enough to stand again, stitches still fresh, a colostomy bag still attached, 50 flew him straight to Atlanta. He wasn't there for pity, he was there to work. And from that moment on, Kid wasn't just another rapper, he was G-Unit's next soldier. By July 2011, it was official, Kid had signed to G-Unit Records. His wounds hadn't fully healed, but he didn't care. His first task, record a verse for Tony Yayo's track, Haters, alongside 50 Cent and Shawty Lo. The same night they cut the record, they shot the music video. Kid moved slowly, every step a reminder of the bullets he survived, but he refused to complain. Pain wasn't a setback, it was motivation. And that drive was exactly what made 50 keep him close. The very next day, Kid was on a plane to Africa performing in front of thousands. Every step on stage hurt, but he powered through it. This wasn't about fame anymore, it was about proving that he belonged. To the crowd, he looked like a star. To 50, he looked like loyalty personified. Kid wasn't from the background, he was family now. And that bond wasn't built on contracts, it was built on scars. By 2014, those scars had hardened into strength, and G-Unit was ready for a comeback. That summer, G-Unit reunited at Hot 97's Summer Jam, and Kid stood right beside Lloyd Banks, Tony Yayo, Young Buck, and 50 Cent. No longer the rookie, now the spark that reignited the flame. Together, they dropped 2 EPs, The Beauty of Independence and The Beast is G-Unit, capturing the old hunger that made fans fall in love with them in the first place. But this time, Kid brought something new, the raw voice of a survivor. And when the world finally started to recognize that voice, the spotlight brought both praise and pressure. 2015 was the year Kid broke through and broke down. He won XXL's freshman fan vote, beating out hundreds of new artists with over 240,000 votes from 139 countries. It was validation from the people, not the industry, but the victory was short-lived. Hours before performing at the freshman concert, undercover cops arrested him on assault accusations made by his ex. Overnight, his name went from rising star to headline scandal. It was the kind of hit that could have ended any artist's career, but not Kid's. His legal team immediately called the claims false, even producing evidence that his ex had fabricated stories before. But social media doesn't wait for the truth, it feeds on chaos. The court of public opinion moved faster than any judge. Still, while the world turned their backs, 50 Cent didn't. He wired $105,000 to cover Kid's bail and went public defending him, calling it dirty work. That moment showed the difference between a label boss and a brother. With 50 still in his corner, Kid had 2 choices: disappear or double down on his purpose. He chose purpose. Even as shows got canceled and interviews dried up, he kept recording. The noise was loud, but his focus was louder. He refused to let controversy write his story. Every verse from that era dripped with defiance, the sound of a man fighting for his name and his freedom at the same time. And that fight soon evolved into something even deeper, a mission to use his voice for the city that made him. After everything he'd survived, Kid realized that success didn't mean anything if his city was still suffering. In 2014, he released Mr. Rogers, a haunting track dedicated to post-Katrina New Orleans. The song was heavy, not just in sound, but in spirit. He painted a picture of boarded-up homes, forgotten families, and streets that never truly recovered. It wasn't a plea for sympathy, it was a mirror held up to America's forgotten corners. And 1 year later, he decided to go beyond the music to tell that story visually. In 2015, Kid released his self-produced documentary, New Orleans Katrina 10 Years Later. There was no major label backing, no Hollywood editing, just a camera, honesty, and the raw voices of the people who lived it. From his barber to his mother to local council members, everyone had a story of loss and resilience. Kid didn't just show the tragedy, he showed the aftermath, the families who couldn't afford to return, the culture erased by gentrification, and the strength that still lived in every block. He was no longer just a rapper, he was becoming a documentarian for his people. The more he spoke truth, the less he cared about chart positions. His mission was clear: keep New Orleans' pain alive in conversation until it mattered again. The same streets that almost killed him now fueled his purpose. He'd turned trauma into testimony, and now he was ready to own every part of it. And to truly own it, he had to take the next step of independence. In 2018, Kid made a bold move. He parted ways with G-Unit on good terms and launched his own label, RLLNR, Entertainment Short for Real Life, Real Expletive Records. It wasn't a breakup, it was a graduation. 50 Cent had taught him how to think like a boss, and now it was time to build his own foundation. Under RLLNR, he dropped the unquestionable and alien air volume. 1. Both sounding more personal and free than anything he'd done before. He wasn't chasing cosigns anymore, he was creating his own lane. The label's slogan said it all: real life, real money, real music. Every track echoed that promise. He'd turned the lessons from bullets, betrayal, and business politics into blueprints for ownership. And as his catalog grew, so did his vision. He wasn't just rapping to survive, he was building something his kids could inherit. And soon, his consistency would lead him right back to the place where it all began. New Orleans. By 2024, Kid teamed up with recently freed legend BG for a new single called Yellow Tape. It wasn't about clout or streams, it was about legacy. 2 generations of New Orleans survivors back on one track, standing tall after everything they'd been through. The sound was raw, honest, and full of life. It reminded the world that Kid's purpose had never changed: to represent the people who refused to fold. Because through every setback, Kid proved one truth: pain doesn't destroy purpose, it defines it. At the 9th Ward to G-Unit stages and beyond, Kid's story is a masterclass in resilience. He was betrayed, shot, doubted, and dismissed. But he never stayed down. Every scar turned into a verse, every loss into a lesson, every silence into a statement. Now, under RLLNR, he's not just surviving the game, he's rewriting its rules. So the next time you hear his name, remember, it's not about fame or headlines, it's about legacy. If this story inspired you, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives like this, and drop a comment on who you want next. Because stories like Kid's remind us of something simple. You can shoot 6 times, but purpose stands up 7.